So welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Tonight we have a special guest presentation from Angie Vichayananda from Leg Up Legal. Welcome Angie, how you doing?
Great, how are you, Steve?
I'm fantastic. I'm so excited to have you on this evening. I remember you gave a presentation for my students, maybe it was a year ago, in a pre-COVID world, and obviously things are much different now, but some things still remain the same.
Sure. Yeah, I can't believe it's been so long.
I know. Yeah, it's funny. Things are so different now, but I feel like the principles you teach about networking for pre-laws, many of the underlying things really haven't changed at all. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, building relationships may be a little bit more difficult in a virtual world, but I think that a lot of the underlying principles are much the same. It's just having to get over the thought of now we're all virtual and how do I approach people in a virtual medium. So I'll definitely talk a little bit about that, but I totally agree that lots of the things that you would normally do to meet people in live and in person much apply to virtual networking too. So.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really psyched for your presentation. I know you've got a lot of great tools and tactics and templates and everything. So I'll turn it over to you and let you do your thing. Folks, there's a chat function here. Please feel free to pepper Angie with questions throughout. I'm sure she'll be able to help you out.
Yeah. All right. So hi, everybody. My name is Angie, as Steve said, and I run a company called Leg Up Legal, and we provide a mentoring program that helps students connect with attorneys who can mentor them and teach them about what the legal profession is all about before they dive into law school. So really what our program is really meant to do is to teach you how to connect with attorneys and how to really build long-term relationships with them. I think a lot of students feel really intimidated by networking because they feel like it's really forced and it's hard to get past that first meeting or maybe even that second meeting and just keep that relationship going. So we really try to provide you with a lot of the tools that you'll need to do that. But before we dive into that, I want to tell you a little bit about my story and why I believe so passionately in all of this. When I decided to go to law school, I could not have known less about it. I'm a first-generation Asian American, and my family are all focused in STEM. So they're all engineers. I had no lawyers in my family. I had no idea what I was doing when I decided to apply to law school. And I didn't even go to undergrad knowing that I wanted to go to law school. So when I started my undergrad degree, I thought I wanted to work in advertising. So worked really hard, got my bachelor's degree in advertising, then went to work for an ad agency, and then the Great Recession hit and derailed all of my plans in having a long career in advertising. So then I started thinking about different options, and I thought maybe I was interested in law school, maybe I was interested in lots of different programs, but I really knew I had to start talking to some professionals to figure out what these professions were all about. So I thought to myself, what sorts of tools do I have personally that I could use to get to know lawyers? And I thought cold calling. I cold call for the ad agency all the time. I used to sell advertising. I used to sell newspaper ads actually by literally just calling random people in a phone book. And I know that's terrifying for a lot of people, but for me, I think that my one superpower in life is that I'm not afraid of being ignored or rejected. So I decided, I'll go ahead and cold call lawyers. So I literally took a phone book, I flipped it open, and I just started calling. And back then, we didn't have so many great online tools for networking like LinkedIn and all the social media tools that you have at your disposal now. So I literally was just cold calling people who were advertising in phone books and just trying to get them to give me a follow-up meeting. And it was really, really hard. But I think you can create a much better impression now through social media. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the different tools that you can use to identify lawyers that you want to speak to and figure out, what types of lawyers practice in the practice areas that you're interested in. The law is just so broad and so vast. And when I started talking to a lot of lawyers, I started realizing that their jobs could be really different from each other depending on what practice area they were focused in. And when I say practice area, I mean like real estate, bankruptcy, family, all these different areas of law. There were so many that I had no exposure with. And when students come into our mentoring program, I tell them, like, listen, there's usually no reason why you should have had a lot of exposure to the law. So don't feel bad if you don't know a lot about all these different practice areas, because honestly, if you've had a lot of run-ins with the law before law school, I would be a little concerned. So most people go into it maybe knowing about one or two practice areas that they may have had some exposure to. You know, you might have heard of some family law cases of people in your family who have gone through family law cases, whether it's divorce or child custody, or you might have heard of, you know, one of your parents might have created a will. So you might have heard some wills, trusts, and estates. There's a lot of different practice areas out there. So when you start thinking about going to law school, the question you really need to be asking yourself is, at the end of the day, do you actually want to be a lawyer, or do you want to use some of the skills that law school teaches you in your career going forward? Because I find too many students treat law school as a completely academic exercise. They think, I'm going to go straight through undergrad, I'm going to power through law school, and then boom, I've got all my degrees. Well, great. At the other end of that, you're actually supposed to get a job where you work for, you know, the next 40 years of your life. So if you don't actually know what it's like to do that job, you may not be very happy in your career long term. So that's why you should be connecting with lawyers to learn more about what different practice areas are like before you go to law school. Because once you're in law school, you have a certain trajectory. Depending on the kind of law schools that you go to, they may or may not have curriculums that are well suited to the practice areas that you're interested in. So what you have to do is you have to talk to lawyers, find out which practice areas are you interested in, figure out what types of lawyers you want to be, and you don't have to know 100%. There's absolutely no reason saying that, you know, you can't go to law school and keep your options open. You can, but if you have a better idea of what different types of lawyers do and what general direction you're moving in, you'll be able to select law schools a lot better. And so, for example, I went to law school knowing I wanted to practice intellectual property law, because by then I had already connected with a lot of lawyers and I talked to an intellectual property lawyer. And that intellectual property lawyer told me, when you apply to law schools, you may want to apply to only strong intellectual property law schools. And there's not that many of them. And they aren't necessarily the ones that you would typically think are the top law schools. So if you've done some research and you've found out that there's like these, you know, a tier of top law schools, typically called the T14 law schools or T15 law schools, that top tier is not necessarily the same law schools that are really strong in intellectual property. So when I started applying to intellectual property schools, I realized, oh wow, I should really be, you know, learning from practitioners which of these schools are better schools. And so that's why students are always so shocked to hear, like, why do you want us to know which practice areas we want to go to before we go into law school? Well, that's why, because the curriculums may be very different, and that might really change the types of law schools you apply to. And so you can start that career exploration piece at any stage. You can start, you know, long before law school, while you're a freshman or a sophomore or a junior. And you can also start while you're applying to law school. It's not ever too late. You can continue that career exploration journey while you're in law school, and connecting with lawyers during that time to find out more about different practice areas you might be interested in. So to tell you a little bit about how to actually go about this, what I do is I search social media for lawyers who are in the practice areas of my interest. So for example, I might go to LinkedIn and there's a search bar at the very top where you can filter people, and you can find people that work in particular industries or areas. And so you can use the filters to narrow it out. The main industry that you would want to narrow it out to is legal services, and or law practice is another one that you might choose. And then in the search bar itself, you could put family law. or you could put trademark law or intellectual property law, and then it'll pull up a bunch of people who practice in that area, and most of it will be lawyers. And you can also narrow by universities. So if you want to find people who are your alumni from your undergraduate universities who might be more willing to speak with you, you might type into the filters your alma mater, and that way you can only find alumni who practice in those areas. And then you can reach out to them and ask them for what I call an informational interview. So how do you go about asking for time? You ask for informational interviews. I didn't know what those two words were at the very beginning when I started my networking journey, but one of my mentors told me that that's what I should be asking for. And so basically, when you start sending out these messages to lawyers, you're going to say, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior from a certain university, and I'm writing to you because I'm interested in law school and I'm trying to learn more about different legal practice areas. I came across your profile. I thought you were really interesting, and I thought you might be able to tell me a little bit about your own journey and how you decided to get into this practice area and give me some advice about law school. So could I get a quick 30-minute phone call where I could conduct an informational interview with you? Something like that, that gives them an idea of, okay, who are you? What are you looking for? What are your goals? And what are you trying to learn from this lawyer? And why are you approaching this particular person? I think it's really important to make your messages really targeted, because if they feel like you're sending out that message to like 200 people, they're going to be less likely to respond to you, because they're going to think, oh, well, they probably have 200 other people who are responding to them. So the more that you can look at their profiles and ask them, or you can look at their profiles and tell them, I'm looking at you particularly because you have XYZ experiences. I'm really interested in learning about that. And the more enthusiastic you come across, the more likely they are to actually answer your message. So I think that you should really try to tailor your messages as much as possible. LinkedIn is a great tool because it allows you to filter so deeply, but you don't have to just use LinkedIn. Most undergraduate universities have some sort of alumni directory. So if you want to go find your alumni directory, you can typically talk to your alumni office at your university, and they will have plenty of resources for you to connect with alumni. You can also search by geographic area. So I'm going to put up one of our guides for you. 1 second. Let me pull it up here. So this is a guide as to how you can go about networking. And so you can start by virtual networking, and you can use, LinkedIn, email, Facebook, whatever you want to use to find lawyers who you want to connect with. So if you want to seek out professional connections online, we just talked about how to filter through your connections on LinkedIn. You can also look at bar associations. So if you don't know what a bar association is, they're literally collections of lawyers. So you have to be a lawyer generally to join a bar association. And bar associations are groups of lawyers who might be joined for a particular geographic region, or maybe a particular practice area. So for example, there's the Texas Bar Association for all the lawyers in Texas. You can join the state bar. There's also usually local bar associations, like the Dallas Bar Association is very active. There's also smaller associations that might be targeted towards particular interests. So you might have like the Dallas Trial Lawyers Association. There is a international trademark association that is for trademark lawyers. So you can find bar associations based on interest as well as based on geographic location. And so you just type in Google, bar associations in New York or bar associations in California, and I'm sure you'll find tons of different associations. Those associations will generally have some sort of member directory, or at the very least, they'll list their leadership. So you can always reach out to some of the leadership and ask them for informational interviews and say, you know, I'm interested in this practice area, or I'd like to practice in this geographic area later on. Can you put me in touch with some lawyers who are in those areas that I could talk to? And so you really want to identify folks that are more targeted to your interests. So if you can, if you join like or if you go look at the Dallas Bar Association's website, usually they'll have committees and sections that will be broken down by practice area. So if it's a very, very large organization, you can usually go find the subcommittees and the chairs of those subcommittees. The more targeted that you are in your search, the more likely you'll be able to connect with somebody that actually will give you information that can help you, and the more likely you'll be able to reach like an individual. So there's also affinity groups that are like bar associations, and sometimes they're called bar associations, but affinity groups may be like for women, or they might be for certain minority groups. So for example, there's the Dallas Asian American Bar Association, and there's also a National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. There's the Hispanic Bar Associations. There's, you know, national and local chapters. So there's all sorts of affinity groups where you can find lawyers who you want to speak to. So first step is really identifying who do you want to talk to, and, you know, make a wish list of people that you want to talk to, and you should get lots of different perspectives. Don't just talk to one lawyer. Talk to as many as you can, and set reasonable goals for yourself. So say this week I'm going to reach out to 2 lawyers, and maybe, you know, every week I'm going to reach out to another 2 more lawyers, just to learn a little bit more about all these different practice areas. It will never hurt you to get more perspectives from people, because all of us have a very different career path. When I went into law school, I kept thinking that there must be a right path. You know, like there must be an easy path that everyone goes to. There's definitely people who went to law school with me who knew they wanted to be lawyers since they were 5. So what was the path that they took that was so direct to get here? But really, the more I started talking to lawyers, the more I realized there is no direct path. Like, people go to law school for all sorts of different reasons. So you really want to, you know, make sure that you talk to lots of people to find out their path. So once you identify all of the people that you want to talk to, then let's talk about what to actually say to lawyers. And I'm going to stop my screen share real quick and tell you another quick story. So my first mentor, he told me he was going to help me connect with a lot of other lawyers, and he dragged me to a bar association event, you know, pre-COVID times, long ago. And he took me to a networking event at a bar association, and there was probably a room of 65 lawyers. And he said, the first part of this event, we're going to present about updates in the law. The second part is a networking event. So I want you to stay throughout the whole thing, and then I want you to participate in the networking event. And I was terrified. I was like 24 years old, I think, when, you know, I was still pretty young, and didn't know anything about how to communicate with lawyers. And at the time I was working as a legal assistant, but I still didn't know really anything about the law. And so when I went with him to this event, I looked around the room, and out of these 65 lawyers, I was probably the youngest person by like 2 decades. I think everybody else had white hair. I was the one of maybe 4 women in the room, and one of maybe 5 or 6 minorities. I could probably count them on my hand. And I was the only minority woman. So I was the youngest. I was, you know, one of very few women. I was one of very few minorities, and I was feeling really out of place at this networking event. And it was nerve-wracking to me. You know, by the time we got to the networking part, I just felt like I was in a bear trap. I just wanted to run, and I didn't want to, you know, stay any longer. And so my boss, he's like, all right, are you ready for the networking part? And I'm like, nope, I'm out of here. See ya. And he said, no, you have to stay. And I want you to just focus on getting 5 follow-up meetings. When you go to live networking events, or when you participate in big networking events online, you should focus on trying to make some connections that will give you a follow-up meeting. because you're never going to be able to get to know people very well during the event. You might only have their attention span for just like 5 short minutes. So your goal should just be to make an impression upon them enough so that you can get that follow-up meeting, that informational interview. So you can approach somebody at a live event and say, hey, I really liked what you said, during this live event. I would love to learn a little bit more about you and your career path. Can I get an informational interview with you next week? And you can do that when you're on these virtual events as well. So if you attend a virtual event and so if you're in a Zoom meeting where you can actually see all the other attendees and you see people talking in the chat box and you're like, that person seems pretty interesting, you can always try to message them privately or find a way to connect with some of the attendees and participants afterwards, especially if you're attending virtual events where there's a lot of attorneys. You want to be able to connect with them afterwards. And you can always connect with the panelists afterwards. So feel free to reach out to me after this event. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can connect with me through email. I'll drop my email in the chat box later. But you can always connect with people that you meet on these virtual events and try to get an informational interview with them afterwards. So when you approach them, the only thing that you should be focused on is getting that follow-up meeting. I wouldn't, try to pepper them with a gazillion questions like during the event. And then once you get the follow-up meeting, then you have to figure out, what is it that you really want to, ask them about and what you want to say. And so my boss, my mentor, he told me, Angie, the only objective that you should have in going into these informational interviews is not learning everything there is to learn about their practice area. It's not learning everything that you need to learn about law school. You can learn some of those things, but the thing that's really going to drive your relationship long-term is if you get that person to care about you. Your one job in going into that informational meeting is to get that person to care about you. And that was really puzzling to me because I was like, well, how do I do that? How do I get a complete stranger to care about me? And the way you do that is you make them relate to you. You make them go back in time in their head to that point in time when they were brand new to this world, just like you, this whole new world of the legal industry and the legal profession and everything that lawyers do. You make them go back in time in their minds and think about what it was like to be you when they didn't know anything about what a lawyer does, when they didn't know anything about law school. And you ask them the questions about what drove them to continue on and what drove them to go to the next step in their path. And so you ask them value-based questions. You ask them, when did you know you wanted to be a lawyer? Have you known for a really long time, or did you develop that interest later on in life? Like, you ask them to find out, okay, so how thought through was this plan to go to law school for them? Because you'd be surprised. I mean, I definitely knew people who went to law school on kind of a whim. And I definitely knew people who, like I said, knew they wanted to go to law school since they were 5. And they'll have very different stories. Both of those types of people will have very different stories. So you need to ask these people, what is the path that you were taking and what was your mindset when you were taking these steps? So, why did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer, and what experience did you have that made you really want to be a lawyer? And how did you pick which law schools you even applied to? One of the lawyers that I did an informational interview with just like literally a month ago told me that he picked law schools because he wanted to go to a place with a really good sports team, because his undergrad alma mater didn't have a good sports team. And it blew my mind. I was like, wait, what? There's no way that you picked law schools based on that. He's like, nope, that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to watch good sports while I went to law school. And I was like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. But, he's a big law partner now. So I'm like, you did something right, buddy. So I think, it might amaze you what these people's stories are. So you make them go back in time. how did they make these decisions? How did they pick which law schools that they applied to? How did they decide out of the law schools they were accepted to, which ones they went to? Did they make the right choice? I think a lot of people skip over that question, but you might get some really surprising answers. If you ask an attorney, do you really feel like you went to the right law school? Was there a different one that you would have chosen? I mean, again, people pick law schools for all sorts of different reasons. And some of them might tell you, you know what, my law school was just really expensive and I regret going into that much debt. And I could have gone to another law school and gotten just as good of an education there. And so it's really important for you in navigating this world of figuring out which law schools you're going to be applying to hear about how other human beings made these very human decisions. There is no substitute for talking to lawyers. You could spend hours on the internet just looking through these rankings and trying to make sense of them and trying to figure out which law schools you're going to apply to based on that. And there is just no substitute for being able to hear how real humans made these decisions and decided, for themselves how to rank these law schools. So definitely, focus on making a bond with them. Asking them these value-based questions will get them to care about you more, and it will make them realize that you're a human being and that you care about them as a human. The worst mistake I see law students make when they contact me and ask me for these informational interviews is they go in there with a set group of 40 questions about trademark law and they want to learn everything there is to know about trademark law from me. And I'm like, but you're missing the forest for the trees. Like, I could tell you about trademark law all day, sure, but that's not going to be the thing that makes you stick out in my mind later on. Like, I'm not going to remember somebody who only messaged me once to ask me 40 questions about trademark law in an hour and then never talk to me again. I'm not going to remember that person. And so like, if that person comes back to me later on and asks for a favor, I'm going to be like, I just didn't really get that much of an, understanding with you. And so if you want to build long-term relationships, you ask them the value-based questions, and then you insert places where they give you advice. So ask them for advice. Are there practice area groups that I could join that would teach me more about your practice area? Are there publications that I can go read to learn more about something that we talked about? And then when they give you that advice, one, make sure you take good notes. Write all these things down. You should always take notes when you meet with these attorneys and, remember what you spoke to them about. That will help you in the follow-up, I promise. So you're going to take all these notes. Then you're going to ask them, okay, what advice do you have for me? You're going to write down that advice. Then after the meeting, you're going to go take that advice. So go join whatever association they told you to join, or go attend whatever event they told you to go attend. And then after that, write back to them and say, hey, I took your advice and this is what I learned. These are all the great things that happened to me after I took your advice. I went to this event, I met all these great lawyers, or I learned about, I read this article and learned more about your practice area and I was interested in XYZ, and use that to follow up with them so it'll come more naturally to you. Because the whole point is to build long-term relationships. I would keep a spreadsheet of every single person that you talk to and you contact, and have, their name in one column, have how you contacted them in another column, whether it's email, LinkedIn, whatever, so you always know how to go back and reference it. Have the date that you contacted them last in one column, and then have all the dates that you've spoke, period, in another column. And the reason I'm saying make those two separate columns is because the first column you want to be able to filter by the last connection that you had with that person. So that way you can see how many people are, most recent and how many people you haven't talked to in a while. Then the next column will just show you, like, I've had 5, 6, 7 interactions with this person. So it'll just help you know, like, okay, how good is your relationship with this person? Then have another column with notes from all your meetings so that you get to know things about this person. You know, if they mention personal details about themselves, like remember those things, because those are the things that make them know that you care about them as a human. So if they mention that they have kids, or they have dogs, or that they have cats, or a horse or something, like write all those details down, because you never know. Those are the kinds of details that will help you bond with them. People, you know, love talking about what they do for a living, but all those other personal details are really what they care about more. So you really want to make sure you make notes of those personal details as much as possible, so that you can, you know, follow up, and that way you'll know, like, hey, you know, they have a birthday coming up, and you can say happy birthday, or they have an anniversary coming up, and you can say happy anniversary. So you're always trying to work in things to follow up on during your conversations. Make sure that your list of questions, you might walk in with a list of questions at first, so that you, so there's never any like dead awkward silence, but don't be married to that list of questions. Make sure that you allow the conversation to go organically. So I have a list of questions for you guys to look at real quick. Okay, so this is how to actually conduct an informational interview. I know, like, a lot of these things may seem super basic to you, and if you're a master networker, awesome. But these were not very readily apparent to me. So I wanted to at least show you guys, how do I actually go about this? So when I start my conversation, I say, you know, thank you so much for making time to meet with me. As I mentioned in my email, I just want to ask you some questions about your practice area and learn about your career path. And then I ask them, how much time do you have for our call today? That just stops the meeting and sets the tone, because they realize, like, oh, they actually value my time. They care about how much time I have today. And so if they tell you they only have 30 minutes, then it allows you to pace yourself accordingly. So you know, I have a limited amount of time. I can't just ask them every question under the sun. If they tell you, you know what, I've got a little bit longer today, we could go for an hour, then perfect. Then you can pace yourself accordingly. But it's always good to just get a sense at the very beginning, how much time do you have with this person? And if you know you have a lot of questions and they say they only have 15 to 30 minutes, perfect. That actually gives you the opportunity to naturally follow up with another meeting. So that's a good thing. It's totally okay. Don't be offended. Don't feel like, oh my gosh, this person doesn't want to talk to me. You know what? They might have made time in their very, very busy day for you, and they might only just have that limited window. So take advantage of it, but then ask them, you know, if I have some other follow-up questions, can we set up another meeting? And most people will say yes. So yeah, make sure you know how much time you have. Then start asking the rapport building questions, as I said. So ask them, you know, is there a name that you prefer me to call you by? If you know, their LinkedIn profile says one thing, but then they go by something completely different, then you want to make sure to call them by the name that they're comfortable with. You know, how did you develop an interest in becoming an attorney? Did you have anyone in your family who is a lawyer? All of these questions are like rapport building questions. And I'll make sure that Steve gets this handout to you guys so you have all these questions in front of you. But then you might want to ask them about their educational experience. You know, how did they choose majors in college, and were they related to, you know, what they did in law school, and how did you select your law school? And then ask them questions about their law school experience. And then, you know, talk to them about their law school experience in depth. I find that people tend to gloss over, like when the attorneys say like, oh, I did, you know, this type of internship in law school. Like, I would ask follow-up questions and say, okay, how did you get that internship? How did you apply to that job? And what made you apply to that job? What was the process like? How many people did you interview with, if they remember? But you know, make sure that you're a good interviewer. It'll take practice. The first couple times you do these informational interviews, there'll be a million questions that you think of later that you're like, oh, I should have asked them this. But that's okay. That's a way that you can follow up with them and say, you know what, there were some questions that I really wanted to ask you that I didn't have a chance to get to. Can we set up another meeting? That's totally fine. You know, you want to set as many follow-up meetings as you can naturally. So then after you learn about, their law school experience, ask them about their first job out of law school and how long did they stay? How did they get their second job? What has their career path been like? All of those things will help you figure out how they navigated all of these steps to get where they are today. Like I said, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is just taking them at face value and just learning about what is their current position right now, and skipping over all the rest. Like I have so many students who talk to me who just want to learn about what is my job right now. And, that skips over all the stuff that's probably going to make them care about you. So I would totally make sure that you ask them more about the journey. Because when you're practicing as a lawyer, I think so many students, once you achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve, you feel like success should be a destination, but it's more about the journey on how you get there. And if you really want to figure out how you can get from, point A to point B, you have to learn how all these other people got from point A to point B. Those are the most important things that I would say that you need to do. So now that I've talked your ear off about all of those things, I'd love to take some questions from you guys. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. I'll continue, going through a couple more principles about networking, but yes, please ask all your questions. So I'll monitor the chat box for them. But yeah, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the ways that you want to present yourself. So when you're connecting with lawyers, you have to be mindful that if you're connecting in a virtual medium, that it's going to feel different, right, than in person. So, make sure that if you're going to connect people on Zoom and connect with people on Zoom, that you are in a proper environment for Zoom to work well. So, if you set up a Zoom call, make sure that your lighting is good, that you look good on camera, that, you're not just a silhouette shadow in the dark and you've got a giant window behind you, flushing you out. Make sure that you set everything up so that your appearance comes off well, because it's just not going to be the same as if you get to meet the person face to face. I would always say that you should request a Zoom meeting or a video chat more so than a phone interview. If possible, always try to get them to see you, because there's so much communication that goes on that's nonverbal communication, and you lose all that if you're on a phone call. So always try to get them to see you, whether it's Google Hangout or Zoom or whatever they want to use. Some of them are using WebEx, but try to find ways that you can meet with them in person. I'm seeing some questions already roll in, so yes, please go ahead and ask your questions here. What majors do you recommend studying in undergrad? Any major where you're going to make a good grade. So I think the most important things that you're going to find on your law school application is your GPA and your LSAT score. So pick a major that you're passionate about, that you're going to perform really well. And law schools do not care about, whether you majored in political science or whether you majored in engineering. What they will care about is if you major in something like basket weaving and you perform poorly in it. So if you choose an easy major, then make sure you do really, really well in it. But yeah, if you perform not as great in a very difficult major, they will consider that. So if you are majoring in organic chemistry and the average GPA for your entire class in OChem is usually like a 3.0 instead of something higher, then you can talk about that and say, like, I took this very, very rigorous course of study, and I made a 3.0, and that might seem like it's average in most majors, but at my school that was actually the top of our class. So you want to put things in perspective for people. But yeah, doesn't matter what your undergraduate major is. I would just choose something that you're passionate about, that you're going to perform very well in. Let's see. What is your opinion on part-time law school? I think you do law school however well it suits you. If you want to go to law school part-time and work, totally viable option. I know people who did it. If you want to get through law school quicker and you want to just go through all 3 years, totally viable option, go do it. It's different for every person. I don't think, there's plenty of part-time programs that are really, really good. I mean, I would say judge them the way that you would judge all other law school programs. Talk to people who went to that school, talk to people who participated in the part-time program, see if they thought that it was well set up and well thought out and that they had a good experience. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say just discount a part-time program just because it's part-time. Let's see, what other things? How can lawyers sell themselves, or how can students sell themselves to lawyers for an internship? Okay, so just putting this out there, internships at the undergraduate level with lawyers are just very rare, okay? Like, if you want to find an internship with a lawyer, you're probably going to have to build a relationship with them first, and then you can ask for that later. So getting them to care about you, remember all those things I said in the informational interview part? Those things are going to be really important for you. I can't tell you how many times I conducted an informational interview and somehow it resulted in a job offer. Like, it was amazing to me. I never thought that that's what they were for. And they really, I mean, that's not the intention. You shouldn't go into it thinking that you'll get a job afterwards, but many times they do result in a job offer later, because that person is like, hey, now I know how this person works, and they are very interested in me and what I do, and I've developed a rapport with them, and I know that I can work with them, and so they give you an offer. So I would say at the undergraduate level, the important thing is to just know they're pretty rare unless you apply to like these well-established fellowship and internship programs. And I do have a spreadsheet of all of the fellowship and internship programs that I know of for undergraduates, and I will also send that to Steve so that you guys can have it. But it has a list of all of the programs that allow you to get legal experience at the undergraduate level. So let's see. I think, and the other thing is, like, just know, since these opportunities are so rare, you might have to try to get other types of jobs, like entry-level jobs, whether it's a paralegal position or a legal assistant position or a file clerk position or something like that, as opposed to an internship. Because usually law firms, if they do give internships, it'll be to law students. So you have to be in law school first. Let's see here. How do you suggest undergraduate students go about finding and applying for internships? Yeah, exactly. So same thing, there's not a lot of them out there. So I would say connect with lawyers individually, one-on-one, and then talk to them about an internship later on. Let's see. I'm currently a business administration major. I'm a little worried about not finding a backup career in the event that I don't make it into law school. Someone recommended that I take a double major, but I'm not sure if I should. Okay, so great news. I was a business administration major, so I know exactly the boat that you're in. So I actually majored in business admin, didn't have a follow-up, did not do a double major, and still made it out alive. I, chose a job in advertising, but again, recession crashed and couldn't continue in advertising, and then decided to go to law school. So there's, if you think that you can find any job out there right now, go for it, apply. I would, cast your net wide on different types of jobs that you want to do, because business admin is a really broad degree. So, apply to a bunch of different things. And then if you think you want to go to law school right away now, go ahead and apply to law school at the same time. And you can make the decision, based on the scholarships that you're given, if you want to go now or if you want to wait. But let's see, I think if you want to take a double major because you're interested in that other major, that's a good reason. If you want to take a double major just because you're trying to hedge your bets, I don't think you need to. It's not necessary. And if it's going to make you take a longer time in school, then I would say no. Emily asked, how does your advice change if you're reaching out to law academics and professors rather than lawyers? Oh, good question. Okay, so I think law professors are much more likely to connect with you than lawyers, because in my experience, most people who go into academia really, really like students. So I think most people who are law professors are going to be a lot more likely to be willing to give their time to you. And if they are your professor, if they're seeing you every week, then for sure they're more likely to give their time to you. So the difference in my approach, I would still ask them all the rapport building questions. I would still ask them, you know, kind of for an informational interview. But you don't have to make it that formal if you don't want. If you want to just drop by their office hours and say, hey, can I just get some of your time and ask you some of these questions about your career path and why you do what you do now, that's totally fine. So it doesn't have to be forced, is the point. And I think that it's, oh, and if you're, if law professors have never practiced, then you may not want to ask the practice questions, but you can just ask instead, you know, did you practice after going to law school, or did you pursue academia right away? So that way you can learn, you know, what their path is. How do law schools view the GRE? I have no idea. That's a question for Steve. Let's see. I'm curious if the speaker has any tips on networking, folks. Oh yeah, okay. So if you haven't reached out to somebody in a really long time, this happens, guys. We know you get busy. We get busy, okay? That's totally okay. Reach out to them and just say, you know, I know it's been a while since we last spoke, and I'm sure, you know, the world has changed a lot, and I'd love to just catch up and, you know, get some time with you and hear about how you're handling, you know, dealing with COVID or how things are going. I think right now, especially, people are a lot more forgiving that you might have lost touch for a little while, because everybody realizes that this pandemic really put everyone kind of off their schedule. So I think that that's totally fine. Just acknowledge that it's been a while, but you'd love to catch up with them, and you'd love to, you know, update them on where you are in your journey. You can always do that. You can always update people on what you're doing now. If you've gotten a little further towards law school, if you've now taken the LSAT, whatever, you can use your life updates to try to circle back with them again. Let's see. Following up on that, do you think work experience or volunteer experience is more beneficial than a formal internship? I mean, I don't think it doesn't matter what you call it. The whole point of those experiences is to learn what lawyers do and get, you know, face time with lawyers and figure out what the jobs are all about. So I would say, you know, definitely when you're looking for volunteer experiences, formal internships, or work experience, you should try to find something in the legal profession, you know, so that you can get that experience. But I don't think it matters what you call it. And I personally don't think law schools really look at it that differently either. Let's see, what if your test scores, such as the LSAT and GRE scores, are high in the 160s and 170s and your GPA is low? So I am not a law school admissions consultant. I don't know really much about that. So I'll let Steve tackle that question later. But let's see, let's see. The next one, does having a certification such as a paralegal certification help with navigation? In my experience, it hasn't helped that much. When I was thinking about going to law school, I thought the same as you, Brent. I started pursuing some paralegal certification classes, but I never even finished them before I went to law school, and I ended up getting an internship even without having the certificate. So I think it does help you learn a little bit about the law, but I don't think it's a good substitute for work experience. And it might help you crack in to get a job a little faster if you think you want to take a gap year or two to work. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary. For those of us who law school is a career change, is there anything you should be careful of when approaching lawyers for? No, I don't think so. I mean, I talk to lawyers for informational interviews even now, and I'm like a practicing lawyer and turned entrepreneur. So like, I don't think you're ever like too experienced to do informational interviews. I just think it's easier when you're a student because we expect students to ask us for those things. It's not as common that professionals ask for those types of things. But let's see. What is your opinion on minoring? Don't really have one. If you want to minor in something, great, as long as your GPA will stay high. So I think just take a major and a minor that your GPA will stay high. Let's see, I'm trying to find, I think I reached the end of the questions. I'm not sure. Let me know if I missed any, Steve. Okay, perfect. Oh, is there anything that we should try to avoid while talking to lawyers? Yes. So biggest mistakes I see people, great question. Biggest mistake I see, people generally make after talking to us is not following up. So I can't tell you how many students I've spoken to during the pandemic. I think I set aside my own personal time at least 4 times a week to speak with students. And I would say out of all the students who have contacted me during the pandemic, I've done it every single week. I think I've only had maybe 10 follow-ups. And I've done probably over 60 informational interviews. So I know that sounds pretty bizarre, but it happens all the time. And it makes me feel really burned because I really, really want to help students. I do. And I think a lot of attorneys really do. And they make a lot of time for you guys. And so if you take a meeting with somebody, make sure that you follow up with them. Say thank you for your time. At the very least, send them a thank you email. At the very least, like, okay, I know I'm a little old fashioned. I think thank you cards are really nice, but I realized during COVID times, it's not that easy to drop a thank you card in the mail. But at the very least, send a thank you email. And then follow up with them a month later and just say, hey, I appreciated your time. I took your advice. This is what happened. Emily says, support the post office, send a card. Yes, send a card. I'm old fashioned. I think that there is nothing nicer than receiving a handwritten message saying like, oh, thank you so much for your time. I think that's really, really nice. So, but yeah, use your spreadsheet to like keep track of everybody. It's really important because you're going to be in the legal profession, let's hope, a really long time. So you're going to come around some of the same people over and over again, and they're going to remember if you treated them like crap. So my advice is, make sure that you constantly follow up with people and keep them, on your radar. And remember when I told you take notes during the meeting? In your follow-up email, I always try to show them that I really cared about their advice by dropping some of the really important notes into the follow-up email. So I say, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really love the advice you gave me about XYZ, drop 3 bullets. And then, I would love to follow up with you in, a month or so if you have time. Again, thank you for your time today. So, something like that in a follow-up email is a great way to just cap it off and let people know you valued their time, you listened to what they said. And then when you follow up with them in a month or so, you can always reply back to that original email. So they see oh, that person has some follow through. They contacted me twice. All of these tactics are good ways to just keep that relationship going. Your whole goal should be to keep that relationship going for as long as you can. There were plenty of people that I connected with for informational interviews that, way later down the line, they gave me something of value, whether it's, finding an opportunity for me or becoming one of my new clients or referring me to other lawyers. So many things come of it when you keep connections with all the people that you connect with. Alrighty. I think that's all the questions. Oh, what's your opinion on the reciprocity factor? I did a networking event in my undergrad where the presenter said you have to offer the lawyers something of value too, other than thanks. The things that you can offer lawyers, oh, great question. So things that you can actually offer lawyers no matter what stage you're at in your career. Appreciation is always one of them. Encouragement and support. So if the lawyer tells you like, oh, I'm hosting a webinar in 2 weeks, be like, oh, great. Can I help you promote it? Can I, post about it on social media? Can I volunteer at the event? If it's a live event, whenever we finally go back after quarantines, you can always volunteer at events, and lawyers love that because they always need people to volunteer for stuff. And my favorite thing to volunteer for is the registration booth. Because if you're at the registration booth, you see everyone who comes into the room. So you get to see like, oh, here's an important person I want to talk to. Here's another person I want to connect to. Registration booth, great place to volunteer. If you can help them design a social media flyer, be like, hey, do you want me to help you design something on Canva? Like, all of these are great ways that you can show them that you're willing to deliver value to them. So appreciation, support, encouragement. You can also offer, one of the things that I tell my students to always do is connect them to other people. So you might be connecting with tons of other lawyers at the same time, and you might start to see patterns of people who might be good connections for each other. You might not be an important person right now, but maybe you've connected with two important people who'd want to connect together. So it's always good if you can offer more connections. That delivers an immense amount of value. Think of all those types of things to deliver value to people. It doesn't have to be, monetary at all. It doesn't have to be a gift or something like that. Like, you can give value in so many different ways. And honestly, it gives me value when people write back to me and tell me, I took your advice and, it benefited me in some way. Mentors and lawyers love to see when you've grown. They love to see, you're making progress on your path, and they were able to offer you something that gave you help to make that progress. That's like one of our favorite things, warms our hearts. So totally, try to offer appreciation as much as you can, and any of those other things, encouragement, support, and connections. Alrighty.
Wow, Angie, this was fantastic. I feel like you gave everyone such concrete, practical advice that they could go out and implement immediately. And I was thinking about, we were talking earlier, how the hardest part is getting started. And I feel like you've given folks the roadmap on getting started. So I want to thank you for sharing all your insights and experience and answering everyone's questions. I'm really excited to get those resources out to everybody. So I'll send them to everybody in a follow-up email afterwards. Thank you again, Angie.
Welcome.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course, definitely. Thanks to everyone for joining and for the great questions. Good night, all.
Bye, all.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime,